business is disclosure of pecuniary interest and general nature thereof. Seeing none, the minutes from July the 13th, was there any errors or omissions? Hearing none, approval of the minutes, mover, seconder.
I'll move.
Moved by Serna, seconder.
I'll second it.
Second by Widner, all in favor.
Because there's so few of us, Mr. Chair, yeah, if we just want to do a show of hands, that would be great.
Okay, motion carried. Okay, discussion regarding residents online survey in question. Michelle, are you dealing with this one?
Yes, Mr. Chair, I can start anyways. There was a suggestion to reach out to the town of Leamington as they had recently conducted a survey of their residents regarding police services. So that was sent out and included in your agenda package. And as well, just following up, once that questionnaire is confirmed and this committee is comfortable with the design of it for Malahide purposes, then we'll be looking at providing public notice of the survey, and that would go in our tax bill inserts, which we had discussed at the last meeting. We would ensure that we had notification on our social media, on our township website, we publish ads in the Aylmer Express, and we would do some notices posted at our township office in the front window and on our community bulletin boards in order to be able to disseminate the survey and get as much participation as possible. So what I'm looking for from this committee today is if we were able to confirm the specific questions, wording of the questions that we would be wanting to be able to include in Malahide's version of a resident survey, that we would be able to start to pull that together and ensure that it was available when we sent the tax bill notices out in the second week of August. So we are hoping, or I was hoping, that we might be able to finalize that if not at this meeting, in the next few days, or give staff an opportunity to be able to prepare the formal survey, as well as ensure we get the insert published to be able to actually enclose it in with the tax bills that are going out in the next week and a half.
Okay, then my only comment is I hope we can keep it as brief as possible and as simple as possible. If you give someone way too many questions, then they simply just don't fill it out.
I'll agree with that.
And through you, Mr. Chair, I think the template that's there from Leamington is fine. Obviously, changing Leamington for Malahide. I would be tempted to add to the list, from very satisfied to very dissatisfied, another category to say don't know, because there could be things that you've never experienced, and I would hate to have no answers because I've never observed or heard of anything related to, I don't know, drug legislation and how it was specifically handled in Malahide. So my recommendation is just to say don't know.
Yeah, I'm fine with that.
Mr. Chair, I think that's an excellent suggestion. The only other thought that I had in the process was that right now it doesn't specifically address finances, and I didn't know whether or not this committee might want to add in an additional question about, or even one or two extra questions to one, say if there was an opportunity to receive policing services at a less expensive model, would you be interested in changing from the OPP to Aylmer, or alternatively, something along those lines, or would you be in favor of switching police services from OPP to Aylmer if there was a cost savings or something like that? The wording can certainly be worked out, but I wasn't whether or not, because the focus of this group is to try to analyze the costing aspect of it.
Yeah, I think that's appropriate.
Yeah, through you, Mr. Chair. So I disagree, because I would like to keep it clean. So the one piece of data that we don't have right now is satisfaction on service level, which is one piece of data that Aylmer is bringing to us. And it is not fair unless we present the full information to where people can compare. I don't think it would be a valid answer. So even if people do answer that, the answer to that question would not be valid because we would not have provided the information. So certainly what I had envisioned is as a two-step process where we fill the gap on satisfaction. Once we have that, then we share the information, which we'll discuss later in terms of the comparison table. And it's based on that information that I would like to then ask, considering everything, including costs and service levels and satisfaction. So all things considered, would you be interested in a change? So I think it would be important to keep those two things clean and separate.
If I may, Mr. Chair, just for clarification, so is the Deputy Mayor looking at having two different surveys at two different time periods? Not sure how you would get that other information other than we've talked about public meetings, but my understanding of what the committee discussed before was that we would be gathering the similar information from both sources, from the online survey as well as the in-person meetings.
So through you, Mr. Chair, ideally, we could do another survey if we don't feel we're going to get a good return or good attendance participation to public consultation where we're presenting information. But I would say that right now we don't have the information to provide to actually ask for that opinion. Like I wouldn't want to put the public in a position to give us an uninformed decision. So if that means a two-stage process, then that would be fine. And if that means that the second stage includes also a survey because we're concerned about, in-person participation, then I would be in favor of that as well.
Rick?
Mr. Chairman, sir, I think like when you ask the public about cost, you have to know exactly what you're comparing. And we don't know what Aylmer can provide and what they can't. We don't know, well, I suppose we do know to a certain extent as to what the OPP can provide and do provide. But to ask that question just based on cost, we don't know exactly where we stand. So we need to find out from Aylmer what they can and can't do. I said this last meeting, find out what they can and can't do and then compare costs because you get what you pay for. And I could police Malahide for $1,000 a month, but that's what you're going to get. So I'm thinking we have to be very careful on asking the public just based on cost because we don't know where we stand yet as far as service goes.
Any other comments?
Yeah, just one. I guess it'd be similar to the amalgamation survey we sent out with them. There must be something in there where people can, maybe under comments, they can just say, no, we don't want it, or yes, we want it, or whatever, but wouldn't all be based on cost either, I don't think. There's some people out there that are quite emotional about this. So as long as they would have their avenue to say what they want to say, I think that would be good.
Through you, Mr. Chair, the second last question does say, please provide any additional comments or opinions. And so I think that does give members of the public an opportunity to provide some additional narrative outside the existing questions.
Yeah, and I would say that if I can, Mr. Chair, that even with the amalgamation, the people filled out their little ballot at the end after receiving presentations, after hearing, Q's and Q&As, and then express an opinion. So if there's a concern about two surveys, I would say then we skip this one and we continue on the path of collecting information, filling out that table, and then presenting that in some sort of summary that people can respond online or can respond in a public in-person format. So,
Well,
so that could
I
be a
would
plan.
I would agree with you, Dominique. There's so many unanswered questions at this point in time to have the tax bill go out in the middle of August, which is a very tight time frame. I would agree with you that the questionnaire should go out once we have all the information before us, and then we would have a better picture.
Yeah, we can do a 2-for-1 because I mean, we right now with the piece we're missing is the satisfaction in the level of service. So we can leave that as a blank and include that as part of the questionnaire. It will make for a slightly longer questionnaire because you will review information at the same time, but at least we're only surveying once, so that can be an alternative.
Okay, I think that the one survey is because I have a number of questions, and I think it's probably appropriate that we get all the unanswered questions before us. Then we can invite the OPP and the town police into our Zoom meeting and put the questions before them. Then we'll know in black and white what we can put down in a questionnaire. Are you okay with that, Michelle?
Yeah, that's fine, Your Worship. Actually, quite honestly, it makes it a little simpler for staff for the next couple of weeks anyways, in that we don't have to scramble to get something in a very short timeline. I think this broadens out the amount of time that we can gather that information, as well as be confident that we're not rushing through something. It was just if we were going to notify residents as a result of in the tax bills, we needed to move quickly on it. So if that's no longer a priority for this group, then absolutely, we've got lots of time to work on the rest of the pieces.
So what time frame do you think would be appropriate? September? Middle of September? To finally have a questionnaire going out?
Yeah, and that, Mr. Chair, is actually the next item on the agenda, was to discuss a little bit about the public consultation meetings and when we were thinking about those. And then we would then, of course, want to get a little bit in advance of that, have the survey and questionnaire ready so that it would be rolled out essentially at the same time, or just a short period of time ahead of the actual in-person meetings that we're contemplating.
Okay, so dates. We're still limited to 50 indoors, right?
That's correct.
So we're almost looking at potentially 2 meetings to accommodate people, I would think.
Yeah, I would suggest to you at least 2. You may want to even consider a third. But again, until we actually, and this is, these are ones that we would look at asking individuals to RSVP, so we ensured that there weren't more than the 50 persons. And then if it turned out that we had an overwhelming response, we could also look at establishing additional dates in order to accommodate any additional people. But I think at least 2, and possibly be prepared for a third in the event that it was necessary.
Okay. So are we looking at the same location, just 2 meetings? Because the only one I can think of is the Malahide Community Place, where we would have sufficient room to space everybody out.
I would suggest to you that location, or potentially the East Elgin Community Complex is the only other facility that probably would be able to accommodate that number. But again, in our own municipality, Malahide Community Place would be the only facility that I'm aware of that we have access to, and can ensure that those protocols are in place to physical distance.
Okay. Is everybody happy with Malahide Community Place for our public meeting?
Yeah, I'm good with that.
Yeah, I think that's fine. It's accessible.
Okay. All right. So we will, once we have a date, then we'll book the Malahide Community Place, and I think we'll probably need to have 2 meetings and we'll see what the turnout is on those two. If they're full, then we probably will have to have a third.
Yeah.
All right, go ahead.
No, I was going to say my suggestion, Mr. Chair, is that we look to be meetings in mid to late September. Typically, meetings that are held in early September tend to conflict with the return to school, and people are pretty busy already with a lot of other changes. If you move a little bit further into the month, it tends to be better just because people's schedules have usually become a little more predictable at that point in time.
Yeah, I agree.
Mr. Chair, I was gonna suggest that if you wanted to have a north-south thing, you could have one meeting at not like Community Place, and you could have the other one probably in our new fire hall. We park the
I don't
trucks
know if we
outside.
can social distance in the fire hall. That's the problem, right?
If you put the trucks outside,
Well, we put the trucks outside, but then that's not the best scenario.
okay, well, it was just a suggestion.
Yeah. No, I think the Malahide Community Place is probably the best, and book two of them, and if they're chock-a-block full, then we'll need to have a third one.
And I'm wondering if Mr. Chair, if the date is also going to be driven by our ability to gather the data and all the information, the ability to schedule presentations. It sounds like we're looking at possibly this committee receiving information and perhaps even a delegation in advance of those public meetings. So I just wanted to, and so we're talking, if we're looking at mid-September, it's 6 weeks, and so I don't know if that's possible based on vacations and things like that, but that could be another factor.
Okay, I would hope that 6 weeks will be ample time to gather all the information and questions that we have.
Hopefully.
I think both the OPP and I think the Aylmer Police would like to have this one behind them. Okay, can we move on to number F, discussion regarding chart comparison, Aylmer Police Services versus Elgin OPP. The question I had, there was two questions I had. One, I think there's maybe I heard comments that the cost comparison may not be accurate. I know that Arun indicated there was $400,000 worth of savings. I've heard comments the OPP does not agree with that figure. So I think we need to have both the Aylmer and the OPP sort this out as to the accuracy of the costing. The second question I had is on our waterfronts. The OPP has a boat. I know that when the kayakers ran into trouble that the Coast Guard came in. Obviously there was no charge for us, I don't believe, for the Coast Guard to come in. Would the OPP be charging us for having a boat patrol, or is that in the same line as the K9 unit and the other specialties that they would have? So both of those questions I need answered.
As far as the kayakers were concerned, the OPP were present. Their boat was not present, but they were the ones that actually activated the Joint Operation Search and Rescue Center in Trenton. And it was the United States Coast Guard that actually came over and did that. But one of the things that the OPP on scene in Port Bruce did was seconded the auxiliary people that were there and positioned them so that we could put our rescue crews, our 2 water rescue crews, on those boats to retrieve the people from the water. So they were there. They have in the past never asked for their marine unit, and certainly we do use it or have occasion to use it more than once a year. And we typically do a training exercise with them, with the marine unit in Port Bruce as well. So there's no cost to us for that, for the Coast Guard or for them, as far as that's concerned.
But my question is, under the new scenario, we went with the Aylmer Police. They are not trained with the boat rescue or anything of that nature. So would we still be calling on the OPP?
I don't know what the protocol is there, Your Worship. if it were a fire or a fire situation, would call for mutual aid from another municipality. I honestly can't answer the question on the marine side of it. I believe, especially given that the harbor belongs to the municipality, that it is the responsibility of the municipality when it comes to that. But I'm not speaking from direct knowledge of that. That's just sort of my understanding.
Okay, well, I think that's one of the questions we have to ask the Aylmer Police on the marine training and what happens when there is a incident on one of our lakefronts.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering, Mr. Chair, then if that could be, so in the document that was circulated as a potential draft for comparison and all the questions we would be gathering, there's in part 3, there's a scenario comparison. And so, those I didn't develop. I think I would like the help of the committee and more probably of staff to describe, a couple of very specific scenarios, and what you were describing could be elaborated. So then that gives an opportunity for each service to describe what their response would be like, if there's additional costs, and how the scenario would unfold.
I agree. Mark, you had a question?
Yeah, I think it's a good question to be asking, because if we dump the OPP and try to do it ourselves, they might just say, well, if you guys wanted the Aylmer Police, you let them handle it. I don't know why the OPP continually does stuff for free. It really doesn't give any municipalities any ambition to improve their own policing services. But as a taxpayer, you're wondering why we're subsidizing them. But I think there's a lot of questions that way with marine and the snowmobiles and the ATVs and, some of the bigger cases. So definitely seems to be considered. Thank you.
I think in the page number 5, the scenario, I think it actually does cover everything when it asks description of resources, equipment deployed for this situation, who provides what additional assistance, and bracket mutual aid. So that does basically say where will those resources be coming from. It doesn't necessarily answer the question is, are there additional costs involved? For instance, all of our water rescue people are trained in boat rescue, but we only provide land-based water rescue because we don't have a watercraft. We have an inflatable that's basically rowed for doing river rescue and those sorts of things, but to go out, as were the case with the kayakers, into the rough lake, we had no ability to do that on our own. We could certainly be an assisting agency, but we couldn't provide the boat part of it.
Yep. Brent, you indicated the auxiliary down there in Port Bruce have equipment where they would be involved in a rescue?
There is an auxiliary Coast Guard vessel in Port Bruce. My understanding is on this particular case, in this particular incident, they were not able to get a hold of the captain of that vessel to get them down. So that's why the OPP secured a couple of other vessels so that we could get our people into that boat and get out into the harbor. It was actually the U.S. Coast Guard that deployed the swimmer into the water to stay with the people until we were able to get to them and retrieve them from the lake.
Any other questions or comments about the chart comparison?
I do, just as one on page number 2. It talks about proximity and response times. I don't think that's a fair comparison. You're dealing with a municipal service that has a very fixed geographic area of response and where they would possibly be within that area of response. Where if we had for instance, if we did have the OPP tending to a call up on Wilson Line, and a call came in for Port Bruce, obviously that response time is going to be considerably more than what a response anywhere within the town of Aylmer would be for the Aylmer Police. So as far as the comparison goes, I don't know that it's a fair one, that's all.
But
Okay.
do we have, when the public want to know, response time seems like such a big deal
Yes.
when it comes to an emergency. So
Yes.
is there another way of asking that? 'Cause we need to know the difference, I think.
Yeah, it's, of course, it's considerably easier for EMS and fire to do that because we're always responding from a fixed location, a station, to an emergency and the response area within that emergency. Where, you know, we have 400 square kilometers within Malahide. So, and they're not at a fixed base, always responding from the same location. So if you wanted to do it as an overall average, I guess that's probably a fair comparison. But, you know, I just hesitate. It would be like asking me to compare my response times within the township to what the city of Toronto or city of London response times for their fire department are. You know, they're, again, very given specific location and they have full-time people there, so they're immediately out the door, and multiple stations, all those sorts of things that to me just come into to question about being able to do that. And for Aylmer to give an answer as to what their response times would be in Malahide, it would just be a best guess. Certainly wouldn't be able to. So to me, it just gives them if we're going to compare response times, proximity response times, I don't know that that's a fair comparison. That's all.
Mm.
Literally, that's the only thing that I see in the whole questionnaire that I don't think can be quantified correctly.
So, through you, Mr. Chair, is there a way, I just anticipate that if in the public consultation, a hand is going to go up and say, well, what about response time?
Well, and I think that possibly
there's a way to have that.
Maybe we collect that data, but we qualify it by saying 400 square kilometers versus, I honestly don't know what the geographic area of the town of Aylmer is, but obviously I would think that a response anywhere within the town of Aylmer should not exceed probably 4 minutes, unless they're already tied up on something else, of course. But to ask for 4 minute, to compare to a 4 minute response time, if we have a constable in Lyons and the call comes for Port Bruce, it's just geographically impossible for them to do that. Not that they're not pulling someone from somewhere else. So that's all. Maybe more qualifying statements within that question. I really don't know how to put it, but there probably is a way.
Just have a question if I could.
Go ahead, Mark.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to Brent. Brent, do the Aylmer police respond to some of our calls now? As I alluded to the fact that they're helping us out quite a bit. Is that a true statement, or they just show up and offer assistance, or how does that work?
I honestly can't answer that. I don't know. I would have to see what those occasions would be, and if they were asked again, that would be a question better answered by the OPP. They would be able to determine, I guess, how many times they've asked Aylmer to assist because they haven't got anybody close by. I'm not sure what those calls for assistance actually mean. And do they do it the other way around? Not sure.
Yeah, it'd be nice to know that information. As far as the fire services, you don't see them too often, or we don't need them, or?
Well, I can't honestly I can't give you one in particular, but that's not to say that it hasn't happened. I just can't speak to that, but I'm sure if they have those calls for assistance, they'd be able to give you the specific information. I mean, obviously OPP has requested it, so they would be able to give you specifically the information where they have requested Aylmer to assist them first. I mean, that's got to exist, that information.
Might give us a better idea of response time than if we're having trouble with response time and they're requesting Aylmer.
Yes, it could.
Thank you.
Any other comments on the chart?
So, Mr. Chair, I'm wondering if we need to discuss sort of process for filling it out, because the different sections, and I was thinking that, well, first off, I'm wondering if there's a third scenario that anybody else have suggestions. I just put two there kind of just as placeholders, but perhaps we can discuss if there's a need or there's a suggestion for a third or more. And then as far as process, I was thinking that parts, I mean, obviously this document can be reorganized, but so 1, 3, and 4 could be sent out directly to each service, whereas I think part 2 is probably more for staff to help us answer in terms of comparisons of all the different options. Because what I liked about, I think this came from the St. Mary's experience, is that staff took the time to show that even though initially it started as 2 options, just to make sure that everybody knows that technically speaking, there are 7 options, you know, from a legal and service provision perspective. And I think it from an education and awareness is, but I don't think that's that particular part of the chart should be sent out to each service for filling out.
Well, my agenda would be that I would like to have our next meeting with both the OPP and the Aylmer Police, but I think they should have our questions ahead of time, because the last thing you want to have is ask us a question and they say, well, I haven't got it in front of me. So we need to kind of, if Michelle has got the questions certainly that we discussed today, or there's questions from staff that they want clarified, send them both on to the OPP and to the Aylmer Police, and then invite them to our next meeting.
I'll agree with that.
Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, and staff can certainly do that. And I would agree with the Deputy Mayor as well, that part 2 is definitely an element that staff are able to be able to review and prepare and respond to. So it would be what sections 1, 3, and 4 that we would be asking Aylmer and the OPP to provide responses to. We would send that out in advance. Ideally, what I would like to see is responses, and then that could be sent out to this committee ahead of time, and then invite both parties to be a delegation to then answer further questions or elaborate on the information that they've provided.
Okay. So what do you think the time frame for our next meeting would be then to get all this done? And
Mr. Chair, through you, the Deputy Mayor mentioned as well about vacation schedules and things like that. So I think that my suggestion would be to allow both of these, the OPP and Aylmer, a month's time in order to be able to complete the information. While I anticipate that most of the information is probably very easy for them, just with schedules and things like that, I don't, you know, we want a thorough response as opposed to something that has been put together relatively quickly. So if we were to look at scheduling something of this group in late August, then I think that would give both police services an opportunity to be able to answer the questions and provide the additional information. We could look at this group meeting, getting clarification. At that point, we could maybe firm up a strategy for a public presentation, and then look, as I said, at then advertising and scheduling some public meetings later in September. My suggestion for a timeline.
okay, so once we've dispersed this information to the OPP and the Aylmer Police, then you'll do a see when everybody's available and then set up a meeting.
Yeah, through you, Mr. Chair, I think my suggestion would be is that I would like to receive a response back from both organizations that they're able to meet that timeline. There's not much point in having this committee meet if the information isn't available. And I think that this committee also would prefer if it took another week or week and a half longer than that in order to get a comprehensive response. I think you'd sooner have that detailed information. And then if it means that we have to delay a week or two. And if it ends up being the public meetings don't happen until the beginning of October, I think that's still within the realm and is probably a responsible approach on this group's behalf.
Okay. Everybody happy with that one?
Yeah, I agree.
Okay.
Yeah.
Anything else before we adjourn?
Just have a question. I guess there was a meeting yesterday with the OPP and Mayor of Central, and I didn't know what was happening. I don't know why they held it. Who called the meeting and what was the real purpose of it?
Well, Sally talked to Dominique and I last week and said there was some clarifications that Mike Butler would like to deal with. And so she asked if we would want to go to the OPP station and Mike was going to clear up some things, and rightly so, Dominique suggested that we really shouldn't be having discussions at any length unless the whole committee was there. So the meeting was very brief, and we decided that if there was going to be any clarification, it should be with the whole committee.
Okay. So there wasn't much of a meeting, and it really probably couldn't have been held.
Yeah, well, I mean, rightly so. Dominique, said there's a process here that we're not following, and we said, yeah, you're correct, and canceled the meeting.
Okay, thank you.
Anything else before we adjourn?
Just wondering, Mr. Chair, if there is a need for an additional scenario, do we leave it as is? Do we want to think about it? I don't know.
Additional scenario for
For part 2, right now, I just, as a placeholder, I identified a boating or water rescue incident, and then I don't have it in front of me, but the multi-vehicle crash with victims and potential DUI, like a fairly extensive situation. Is there a third one that we want to also explore?
I think potentially, just because certainly we've been seeing a considerable amount of it lately. Probably drug overdose and missing person, or a person wandering away. We've just recently had a few occasions where that's happened. So obviously those are situations that are unique. And I think it would be nice to see what everybody would be coming with for those situations. And you can qualify that as sudden death, overdose, missing individual. Individual, we had to deploy a considerable amount of resources to try to find that person. And there was concern for their welfare. So I think it's happening more often, unfortunately. So I think it would be possibly a good third comparison to put in part 3 scenario.
Grant, if I may, just for clarification, sorry, Mr. Chair, through you. So this would be missing person as a result of mental health issues or dementia or something like that type of a scenario?
Or possible drug overdose. So
Okay.
A self-harm situation could be qualified as a mental health issue, and certainly could also qualify it when we've got a couple of vulnerable occupancies with people that are require assistance, so they can wander off.
Yeah, I misunderstood. I thought that these were 2 separate incidents. I thought that the drug overdose and a response on one item, and then a missing person was something entirely different. So thank you for that clarification.
And we could do it as both as well. I mean, we've recently had that same thing where I don't think it's any secret the health unit is talking about another flare up of fentanyl in our area, and we are seeing that. So we have had that where we've come up on the scene, and that has been present. So it's a very real situation that we've had to deal with most recently even. But the missing person, mental health, overdose, possible suicide, we deal with it. I don't think monthly, but probably 6 times a year. And it does require considerable resources and not organization. I'm sort of at a loss for words today. Coordination of everyone to be able to get this done, to look for these folks.
I would say that's 2 different scenarios, because you're going to have an entirely different approach to a missing person versus an overdose.
Okay.
Yeah, and we can certainly flesh that out, Mr. Chair. That's not a problem.
Okay. Anything else before we adjourn?
Just a question. I don't know if it'd be valid or not, but Aylmer, it's not used to doing rural areas. Could they bring any special skills or expectations that maybe the OPP has or hasn't? Might be just kind of a question we could throw out there. We're going to be dealing with farms and in the Amish community and animals and, vaster areas. So I don't know if I think there's some differences for sure. So it'd be nice to know.
Yeah, we can ask that question when we talk to both of the parties.
Yeah, and I'm wondering through you, Mr. Chair, if, because that's a good point, and we could perhaps put something in the chart to say, describe what you consider unique to policing a rural area and what, services you provide or what experience you have or something to that effect. Because, you might as well have them think about that in advance.
Yep, okay. Okay, if there's nothing else, I'll take a mover and seconder for adjournment, please.
I'll move.
Moved by Serna, second. Whitner, all in favor? Carried. Thank you all. Stay safe this weekend.
I will.
Thank you.